Now, history is often something we read about in textbooks, watch on TV, or learn about in class. Today, we are very fortunate to have history standing here right beside us. We're joined today by Holocaust survivor Werner Salinger. Also with us today on stage is Debbie Colton from the Lappin Foundation. You may remember that Debbie presented to us earlier this year in December. Now, Mr. Salinger's life has spanned the most defining moments of the 20th century, from witnessing Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, in 1938 Germany, to serving his adopted home in the U.S. Air Force at the height of the Cold War. His story is one of survival, the immigrant experience, and an extraordinary commitment to service. Mr. Salinger is here today to share his recollections of a childhood in Berlin, his journey to the United States, and his eventual return to Germany in uniform of the American military. It is a profound honor to introduce Mr. Werner Salinger.
Please join me in another round of applause saying thank you for your service to our country. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be back at the school. I want to thank Mr. Menegoni for inviting me to join Mr. Salinger to speak with you today. It's quite an honor and a privilege to meet a Holocaust survivor, because here we all stand at the threshold of time where very soon there won't be survivors alive to bear witness to the Holocaust. And that's where each and every one of you come in. Because what you hear here today, what you learn here, what you learn in your classes about the Holocaust will only continue forward if you carry it with you into the future. So we ask that whatever the story you hear today, this wonderful opportunity to meet this very special individual, please take it forward and share it with other people. You can't point to one date on the calendar and say, that's the date the Holocaust started. We have a difference of opinion. For me, I identify it as when Hitler rose to power in 1933. And Werner would tell you for himself where he pinpoints the start of the Holocaust. But regardless of the date that it started, it had absolute tragic consequences for humanity, and in particular for the Jewish people of Europe, who were selected for murder to create the perfect race. More than 6 million Jewish people, including 1.5 million Jewish children, were murdered because they were Jewish. Millions of other people were also persecuted, oppressed, and murdered. Anybody know other groups? Yep, just...
Probably.
Yep. Good. Any other groups? The what? Gay men? Other groups?
Slav.
Yes, Slavs.
Disabled.
Yes, individuals with disabilities, including children. Political opponents. And the list goes on and on. The Holocaust
And was bad.
happened because people allowed it to happen. It was people who did this to people. And it was fueled by hate. And that's why it's so important to understand and hear for yourselves what happened was real, it took place, because Holocaust denial and Holocaust distortion are on the rise. And the only way to counter it is to set the record straight. So we're going to dive right in, give you the opportunity to meet Mr. Salinger, and when he's done speaking, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. And we hope you'll take advantage of this very valuable moment in your lives, actually, because not many people your age get to meet a Holocaust survivor. So Werner, why don't we begin with, tell us about your family and yourself. When were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, thanks, Debbie, and thank you to the principal for the introduction, and thank you all for inviting me to be here today. I was born in Berlin, Germany. Berlin was the capital of Germany at the time, and the time was 1932, April 1932. If you're any good at math, you can figure out I just turned 94.
Please.
About a week and a half ago, right? So Berlin, Germany, it was the capital. I was an only kid. My mother and father were both professional people. Unfortunately, my mother died soon after we came to this country. We actually arrived in this country in 1939 on Lincoln's birthday, February 12th. And the goal, although the figure that is always used for how many Jews were killed, and I hate to say it, but fortunately, it was only 6 million. That was not really the goal of the Nazis.
Excuse me.
The goal of the Nazi government was not 6 million, it was 11 million. They had taken a pretty careful census of the number of Jews in Europe, both in the countries they had already conquered and the countries in Eastern Europe they were still aiming to conquer. And that number was not 6, but 11 million. And they met one day in 1942 on the 20th of January in a villa outside in the suburbs of Berlin. And in one day, at a table around which were about a dozen high-ranking Nazi officers, they decided that what was then called the final solution. They were going to kill 11 million people, and they only had two major concerns to come out of that meeting. The first was, what psychological effect would it have on the German soldiers ordered to do the killing? That was their first major concern. On any concern about the 11 million, but what psychological effect would it have on the German soldiers ordered to do the killing? And the second major concern was to the logistics, meaning mostly trains at the time, that it would take to get 11 million people. That's about twice the number of people who live in this state. Massachusetts has roughly 7 million or so. They wanted to kill 11 million. And they decided in one day, called it the final solution, sitting around a table in a villa outside of Berlin, Harry. So when do I date the beginning of the Holocaust? Well, I was born in April. 10 months later, in Germany, Adolf Hitler came to power. He was not elected at that time. He was appointed by the person who was then the president, Karl von Hindenburg, was the president of Germany. And Hitler had been very active in politics, especially Nazi politics. He had been in jail in southern Germany in the 1920s. Many of you might know of a book. Anybody know which book he wrote while he was in jail?
Mein Kampf.
Mein Kampf, translated from German, means my struggle. And he made no secret in that book that he wrote in the 1920s that if and when he came to power, he would kill every last person with a drop of Jewish blood in them in all of Europe. And that number was 11 million people, not 6. They only got to 6.
So Werner, before Hitler came to power, tell us about your family. What did your parents do and what was life like for them and for you as a Jewish family?
Well, I was an only kid. I was obviously a Jewish kid. And Jews in Germany at that time, prior to Hitler's coming to power, we didn't live. The Jewish population was very well integrated into the German population. There were no ghettos and no neighborhoods where only Jews lived until the Nuremberg laws were passed on the 15th of September, 1935. My parents were both professional people. My dad was a lawyer, specialized in labor law in the German government, and my mother was one of the world's first orthodontists. They were called pediatric dentists in those days, but she was one of the world's first orthodontists, and unfortunately contracted tuberculosis on the ship coming over to this country and died within 10 months of our arriving in the United States. I consider her a Holocaust victim, which she actually was, because she wouldn't have gotten TB if she hadn't been on that ship.
Werner, so it wasn't easy, excuse me, for people to leave. So how was it that your family was able to leave Germany?
Well, let me answer that in a broader sense. Anywhere in the world, if people want to escape from their own country, I'm thinking now, for instance, of Vietnamese people who worked with the Americans during the Vietnamese War, you have to have three things, whether you're leaving from Vietnam or Germany or any other place. You have to have, number one, money. You can't go anywhere without money. Everything costs money, and you have to pay people along the way. So you have to have money. You have to have a visa from the country to which you're hoping to emigrate. And you also have to have an affidavit of support written by a citizen of that country. In our case, we needed an American citizen to swear in writing that they would be responsible for the financial health of the three Salingers, Eldon, Kurt, and Werner. I was 6 at the time. You have to have an affidavit or someone who will swear that they will support you should you need the support, that you will never become a burden to the American taxpayer. That's pretty common in other countries as well. You need an affidavit of support. So I guess we had the money because we bought the tickets and we got the visa, and that was hard because the United States of America only allowed something like 35 or 40,000 German Jewish refugees a year to come. And of course, there were a lot more people than that wanting to escape Nazi Germany. And you had to have an affidavit of support, and we had a very hard time getting that. I'll introduce you to a man named Carl Lemley, Laemmle. Came to this country as a 17-year-old from Lappin, Germany. And he was Jewish, but had nothing to do when he came. He just was a young man wanting to come to America, and he came in 1903. And he struggled for about 10 years before he found his way into the American movie industry, and he became pretty wealthy, made a lot of money, actually founded Universal Studios in Hollywood, became quite rich, and when the Holocaust ratcheted it up, which I date, by the way, to the 15th of September 1935, when the Nuremberg laws were published, he decided that the best thing he could do was try to help any family that had a connection to Lappin, Germany. My mother happened to be one of 5 sisters, and the oldest sister was married to a man from Lappin, Germany. And so he gave them an affidavit of support in writing. When my parents, I guess they didn't know anybody else they could approach, so they approached him again, and he said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this again. The American State Department has warned me against doing it again, so I'm sorry, the answer is no." Fortunately, I had another uncle in New York already who said, "I'm going to go see this guy the next time he's in New York." And he did, and he was able to convince him to write us an affidavit of support. And so we got it from him. Absent that, I wouldn't be sitting here this morning. I would have gone up and spoke like the other 6 men. And so I date the beginning of the Holocaust. My mine to the publishing of the Nuremberg Laws. One of the first things that Hitler did when he came to power in 1933, just 10 months after my birth. I was obviously just a baby, so I didn't know anything about politics at the time, but he did. And he sent a team of about a dozen high-ranking Nazi officials to other countries around the world that already had racial laws. And you've studied this history maybe, so any idea where the first country, which was the first country they went to? Anybody?
Yeah, but Poland. Poland? No. Yes.
Thanks for playing, but
Yeah. Correct. Yes, I think it's U.S.
yeah, the United States of America. We already had our own racial laws. We had something called the Asian Exclusionary Act, which was written by the U.S. Congress in 1882, intended to keep people of Asian ethnicity out of this country. In other words, people of color, yellow color mostly, mixed with Asian. And of course, we had Jim Crow. We already had Jim Crow, which discriminated very heavily against people of color, especially black people.
And speaking of Jim Crow, just a FYI, on Wednesday night in your community, there's going to be a public screening from Swastika to Jim Crow at 6:30 at the community center. It's very compelling, and if you want to learn more, I encourage you to come and participate in the conversation. So Werner, what did 6-year-old you think about where you were going, and how did you feel about it?
Well, 6-year-old me felt excited about it. I had no idea what the politics involved were. I did immediately understand when the Nuremberg laws were written. There were two. One was called the Reich Citizenship Law, which defined who and who could not any longer be a citizen of Germany. So Jewish people who had been total citizens of Germany yesterday woke up this morning to the fact that they no longer were citizens of Germany. How did that affect me? I could no longer go to the school that I had been going to just yesterday. And the friends that I had yesterday, who were German kids my age, but not Jewish, no longer called me a friend, they called me an enemy. Overnight. How did it affect my parents? The second law was called the Law of German Blood and Honor. It was Hitler's intent to create a pure German race without any other bloodstreams in it. And most notably, he wanted to get rid of all Jews. I already told you the goal wasn't 6, it was 11 million. And that law was published in Germany. When those guys came back from their visits overseas, very high-ranking Nazi officials, they published what became known as the Nuremberg Laws. And that date was September 15, 1935. And the law said that my parents, both professional people, who could treat anybody, in the case of my mother, the orthodontist yesterday, but today could only treat people who were Jewish, no non-Jewish people. In the case of my father, he was a lawyer, and he could, from that day on, overnight. Yesterday was okay to have clients who were not Jewish, and this morning it wasn't. That's how it affected them, that's how it affected me.
Werner, what was the voyage like? Do you remember any details?
Well, yeah, I remember it was in February, so in the North Atlantic, from Holland to New York. Pretty rough weather, but I crossed it many times since. Crossed it in a troop ship, actually, in Lazy Troops 1, going the other direction, back to Germany. So it was stormy, but for a 6-year-old kid, it was also exciting.
Adventure, right? So you get here to the States. Where did you go? And what did your life become like for you?
Well, when I came here, I couldn't speak a word of English, which was pretty embarrassing when I was in school like you are now and I needed to go to the bathroom. But I couldn't, and neither could my parents. So first goal was to learn how to speak English. And because of my mother's tuberculosis, I was quickly separated from her and never saw her again. Died one day after my 7th birthday. She never made it to 36, very young, very sad because she was a world-renowned orthodontist at the time. And she was also a pretty hip lady, I learned. She used a hyphenated last name, Dr. Hilda Marks-Salinger, in the 1920s and 1930s. That was pretty unusual for that time. So, pretty hip lady, guitar playing lady, never made it to 36.
What was most challenging for you as a 6-year-old in school coming to this country?
The language, of course, and learning how to become an American kid. So I got sent to Princeton, New Jersey. I had a relative there. My father's first cousin was married to a man, world-renowned, New Testament theologian, Presbyterian minister. And they had 3 kids of their own, boy, girl, boy. The oldest of their biological sons was drafted into the Army in World War II and killed in the Battle of the Bulge in 1944-45 in Germany. A very decisive battle in the Second World War, but he never made it back. And they had 3 kids of their own, boy, girl, boy, and they took in 5 kids like me, all refugee kids, all from the wife's extended family. And she, of course, was Jewish, and she had married Oda Pieper sometime in the 20s. And so we had 8 kids, 3 biological kids of their own, and 5 kids like me. I think it was 2 boys and 3 girls.
What's amazing is I just met Werner, I'd say just a few years ago, but I met you as Warren Salinger. And I recently asked him, what's with the name switch? And tell them what 6-year-old Werner did.
Well, 6-year-old Werner decided he couldn't go to school in the 1st grade about the same time that the United States was going to go to war with Nazi Germany, and with a name like Werner, I didn't think that was very cool.
Yep.
So I just started calling myself Warren, and I was Warren my whole life. I never changed any papers, never changed passport or my naturalization papers. They were always Werner, and that was always just fine, until one day the shoe bomber on an airplane on the way to Detroit tried to blow up the airplane, after which security became much tighter, and you couldn't show up at the airport with a passport that said Werner and a ticket that said Warren. So I just became Werner again.
And one of the first examples you told me about coming to this country was your introduction to racism in America.
Yeah, I'd only been in this country 3 weeks when my mother, who at that time was still hoping to practice dentistry again, was told that if she went to Richmond, to the University of Richmond, that's where she could take the necessary courses most quickly and also most cheaply, which was very important at that time. So we went to Richmond, 3 weeks in this country, went to Richmond, slept somewhere in a hotel, got up the next morning, onto a bus, and sat in the back of the bus, Richmond, Virginia, 1939. When the bus driver saw 3 white people sitting in the back of the bus, he brought the bus to a screeching halt. I'd been in this country 3 weeks. Looked in the rear view mirror and saw the 3 white people sitting in the back of the bus, brought the bus to a screeching halt and screamed at us in a language we could barely understand, using the N-word. Didn't we know the back of the bus was for the N-word?
Welcome to America.
Welcome to America, the land of the free. and the home was great.
Yeah, and even though your family was fortunate to escape Nazi Germany, it certainly had its long-lasting and devastating impact on you personally. You lost your mother because she got sick on the voyage, lost her at a young age, you were separated from your father, went to live with another family. And yet, you made the best of it. It would be wonderful to tell the students, who is one of your neighbors in Princeton?
Was this pretty?
Well, Albert Einstein was our neighbor, just lived about 5 doors away, and my maternal grandmother who had rushed to this country to try to help raise me because my mother had died, knew the woman who worked for Dr. Einstein, knew her from birth, literally when she came out of the womb. They were both from Freiburg, Germany, so when my maternal grandmother would visit me, we would walk down to the Einstein house, and if Uncle Albert were there, I just started calling him Uncle Albert. He would take me by the hand. He loved kids. I was just a kid, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years old. But he would take me by the hand and walk me through his garden. And then back to his studio, take his violin off the wall and play it for me. So I knew him for maybe 4.5 years when I was 7, 8, 9, 10.
Isn't that amazing? To meet someone who knew Albert Einstein, incredible. So Werner, you went on to high school, you graduated middle school, junior high school, middle school.
Let me tell you first about Crystal Night.
Oh, absolutely.
I experienced Kristallnacht, because it's called in German. In Berlin, we lived right in the middle of Berlin in a pretty mixed neighborhood, commercial and residential. I guess you'd call it upscale. It is certainly today. And we had a very large apartment because my mother's dental practice was in the same apartment. And it was on the second floor, overlooking across the street a bevy of stores. Mostly all, maybe all owned by Jewish owners. And even before Kristallnacht, which was November 8th to 9th, 1938. Even before that, those storefronts all over the country had the word Jude, J-U-D-E, in very large print, painted on them. And then at Kristallnacht, of course, the storefronts were smashed. And Kristallnacht didn't just happen by accident on that day. The day before in Paris, France, a young German Jewish man who happened to be living in Paris got so incensed by what the German Nazi government was doing to Jews that he bought himself a pistol in Paris, France, walked into the German embassy in Paris, France, and killed the first person he saw. So naturally the German Nazi government was incensed. The next day, and Goebbels, the propaganda minister, ordered Kristallnacht to happen on the night, November 8th and on November 9th. Ordered the storefronts of Jewish-owned stores all over the country, not just Berlin, smashed. I could look out and see shattered glass all over the street, bodies all over the street. But the thing I remember most, he also ordered Goebbels, and has also ordered the burning of synagogues all over the country, and ordered German fire departments not to douse the flames, just to let those synagogues burned to the ground. There was one exception to that, a very courageous fire captain in the eastern part of Berlin said, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to try to quell this fire, and did. That synagogue was further destroyed by Allied bombing raids later in the war, but it was rebuilt after the war, and is a very beautiful house of worship today.
That's a lot for a child to observe, to live through, to remember, right?
Still strong as well today.
It's a lot. Werner, what did you do after high school in this country?
Well, I went to the University of Maryland for a while, wanted to become an engineer. And then I was told by various family members that that wasn't a good idea for a Jewish boy from Baltimore that the profession of engineering was not very kind to young Jewish men. But I went to the University of Maryland, and then the Korean War broke out, and I had been too young for the end of the Second World War. I was just 13. But when the Korean War came along, I said, this is mine. And I immediately joined the U.S. Air Force, 9 years, 5 active, 4 reserve. Went back to Germany, became an intelligence officer, did a lot of interrogating. At that time, this is very foreign to students today, but this was the height of the Cold War, 1951, 52, 53, 54, 55, that period. And we were absolutely sure that we would be going to war with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Which country was that? That is Russia today. Was still in those years, 50s. Winston Churchill had just given a speech in Fulton, Missouri, calling the border between East and West an Iron Curtain. He said an Iron Curtain, and it became known as the Iron Curtain. And we were all sure that we would be going to war with the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet.
And so you're in Germany, and a big life-changing event happened to you.
Oh yeah, I met my wife. That was life-changing, all right. 74 years now. But she was the daughter of a Nazi soldier, actually. I married the daughter of a Nazi soldier. He was not by any means a Nazi, but he had been drafted into Hitler's army, and Hitler's army in 1937 and 38, 39 was the Nazi army. And he had fought on the Russian front, actually, been wounded and returned home. And I got to know both him and my mother-in-law, loved them both. I'm often asked, well, how did you relate to your father-in-law? I said, well, pretty simple. He loved me and I loved him.
And what about your family? How did they accept it?
Well, it was a little bit like Robert Frost's Road Less Traveled By. It was not the common thing to do, but it worked out well, and my family accepted my wife, and it all worked out. All worked out.
Wonderful. Tell us about your family today.
My family today, although I don't live with my wife at the moment, my family today, we have 4 children, three daughters and a son. My son is a judge here in this state, Massachusetts, Superior Court judge. So 4 kids, 6 grandkids, and 7 great-grandkids.
Werner, how long have you been speaking about the Holocaust, and why do you do it?
Oh, I speak about the Holocaust because I think it's absolutely, totally important to try to convey to young people still in high school or even younger how important it is to speak up. It happened so quickly in Germany, and Hitler made no secret about it. He wrote about it in his book, Mein Kampf. Made no secret how he disliked and hated people with just a drop of Jewish blood in them, and that he was going to get rid of them and establish a goal of killing 11 million people because they had taken a very careful census. So the message is always the same. You know, I've been to Germany so many times, lived there for 4 years in the Air Force, and then came back, and then 5 more years in the States here in the reserves. And every German village, every German city that you drive through has at least 2 churches in it, a Catholic church and a Protestant church. And those churches existed in the 1920s and the 1930s as well. But the religious community did very little, if anything, to fight anti-Semitism. So the message is always not just hatred against Jews, but any hatred against any group of people You gotta speak out about it. Get involved in local politics. I ran for school committee in the city just up the road, down the road. It's the only way you can change things. It's with your vote. And you can't vote, like you can't win if you don't run, you can't vote if you're not elected. Get involved and don't let it happen again. Those churches just stood by for 10, 20 years. Very few people within those churches did anything about what was about to happen. So, be upstanders, not bystanders. Talk to your parents, talk to your teachers, get involved, and don't let it happen again.
Werner, I imagine some students are wondering, did you know you were going to be stationed in Germany? And did you have any say in that? And what was that like for you to go back home?
No, it was at the very height of the Korean War. I fully expected to go over to Korea. But when the Air Force discovered that I could speak fluent German, which I still do, they said, no, the place for you is Europe, Germany. The International Red Cross had discovered at that time that the Russians, the Soviets, as they were called in that time, were still holding some 10 or 15,000 German prisoners of war. They'd been there many, many years. Some of, 15, 18 years. Many of them did not want to come home. They had Russian women with whom they were married in common law marriages. They had kids, many of them. But the Red Cross said, you got to go home. And so they came home. And of course, they had been involved in the rebuilding of the Soviet Union. I'm talking 51, 52, 53, that period of time. And they knew a lot about the new Soviet Union, which we knew very little about, and we wanted to know about because we were absolutely positive that we would be going to war with the Soviet Union, not tomorrow or the next day, but any minute this afternoon. Fortunately, that hasn't happened yet. And they knew how long the runways were in the new airfields, and they knew how thick the factory walls were in the new factories, and they knew what kind of steel was used in the new bridges. And we got all that information through interrogation, sent it back to the Pentagon so they could prepare the bomb folders for the next war, which we were certain would start not tomorrow, the next day, but this afternoon.
And how was that for you being back in Germany?
Well, the first year was tough. I had some hard times of stepping off. We came over on a troop ship, stepping off Bremerhaven, one of the German ports in the north, to the tune the Air Force band was playing on the dock, which was, I wonder is kissing her now. Not a great morale booster. But anyway, so then we got reassigned, and I did a lot of interrogation work there.
So I think we're going to turn it over to the students now.
Okay,
Mr. Red, I'll give you a chance to ask questions.
okay.
Who's going to start?
Anybody? I guess.
Yes, mine.
Sure.
My own personal history, mine. Mr. Werner, could you please tell me more about so what that? What's the outcome? What did that?
With my family, 9 and 10 of mine died at a house, and the only survivors were my great-great-grandfather and his mother, who my great-great-grandfather first flight to Mexico, and then she followed, and we got out very early, but she was amazed just by once she got to our house there. She asked if all of that room that she was in was theirs, and then to explain to her that the whole house was theirs. And I wanted to know what kind of adjustment moving to America could have been.
What kind of adjustment for him moving to America?
Yeah, from Berlin to Hungary, it was.
And so you want to know the adjustment?
Yeah. Yes.
What was the adjustment like making you scared when we end? How was it?
Well, another country. So moving to Princeton was a big help because the person with whom I lived, who was this Presbyterian minister, New Testament theologian, he actually had, he and Albert Einstein actually had received honorary degrees from the Sorbonne in Paris, France on the same day. So he was a pretty important guy, and he took a lot of pains for me. My first summer here, some Jewish charity actually sent me up to a beautiful camp in Maine, Camp Chickawaw it's called. But the challenge is becoming an American kid from having been a German kid. And that takes some, no matter what country you come from, that takes a good bit of working out. So it takes about a year to kind of feel comfortable. Not just the language, but the customs and the culture. Yeah.
What's weird? Scared. Like,
Yeah.
How long did it take you to like fully learn English and be confident in your speaking?
Artists.
how long did it take to get this?
Not personally. This is.
Well, I think it took about 6 months. Went to first grade, in Princeton Elementary School. It was wartime by then. We, the United States, and Pearl Harbor had occurred. 51 became 52, and about 6 months, maybe a year to get more perfect at it. But young kids learn a foreign language with me, and I was just a young kid.
It's gone. You know.
And do you remember like how long the like ramp over to the United States?
Do you remember how much to go to it is for a spot?
I do, exactly, 8 days.
Maybe.
8 days, but we went to London first. We wanted to get out of Germany as quickly as possible, for obvious reasons. And we were able to because my father's law partner and his wife already had an apartment in London. And his wife was the daughter of the chief rabbi of Berlin. His name was Leo Peck. Today in Berlin there's a Leo Peck Straße. He survived concentration camps and he survived the war. So we went to London first, stayed there about 6 or 7 weeks, then went back to Holland to catch the ship to come to America.
And 8 days later.
8 days later we were here. And I love ships. I want to tell you why I love ships. One of the things that happened before we left Germany, one day at my father's law office, after the Nuremberg laws were posted and he could only have Jewish clients, he had a Jewish partner in a small office in a larger business house in the center of Berlin. Fortunately, that house had a front stairway and a back stairway, and fortunately also it had a very courageous woman who was the building superintendent. And one day, it was after Kristallnacht actually, the 3 Gestapo men arrived downstairs wanting to arrest my father, and just for being Jewish. And the woman was very courageous, ran up the front stairs and warned him. And my father was not a guy to really make decisions, usually very quickly. Made one that day, and he ran down the back stairway and then hid out at his mother's house for 10 days. Why they didn't find him at his mother's house, I don't know. I think in those days, the Gestapo guys had lists of people, and if one guy wasn't here, well, they just went on to the next one. But he told me when he came home after the 10 days that he had been on a business trip to Bremen, which is a big seaport in the north of Germany. And to validate that story, he brought me a bunch of beautiful little model ships that I still have today. And it really awakened my interest in ships. And I love being on ships. I've worked on ships for 14 years or more. So, yeah.
It's a dice spinner. Dice thread.
Yeah, that was his story.
Yeah.
And he lived to be 93.
When you came to America, did other kids support you?
To good cause.
Good types only that.
It was.
Other kids that I went to school with in America, yeah. Especially ones that got to speak pretty good English after, 8, 9 months. Yeah. They did support me.
How did you experiencing the Holocaust the affect your faith a lot?
And it's good question. I feel that food has to form your today.
But
Well, I'm not a very religious guy. As a matter of fact, I'm not a religious guy, but I'm very proud of being Jewish, and so were my parents. They always taught me, and I taught my kids the good things about being Jewish. Foremost of which, coming to my mind, is the Jewish commitment to education. We are always more than represented by our actual physical numbers, wanting to be educated and educate our families.
no, the question they saw that these are they're using.
And you know, first came to America, were there any people that you met that had similar experiences? What do you think you said when you first came to America, are there any people who had similar experiences like that?
Like, we ain't so skinny around. Just still, I should be what civil friends if there's a missing friends more.
Well, my best friend growing up, my father got remarried, so I had a stepmother, and one of her relatives had a son who was pretty much my age, maybe a year older, who had come out of Germany on the kinder transport. There was a period of time when several trainloads of kids who had been invited to come to England by English families were able to leave on what began to be called kinder transports. So Johnny Newmeyer and I were very close friends growing up, and I had one or two other friends. And of course, I had the 5 kids who were the 5 refugee kids who were living with me in prison. We're all from an extended family kind of environment.
Werner, I'd love you to tell them a story you just told me today. I learned something new about him with every school presentation. The long-lost friend you found. A childhood friend.
Mighty more.
Yeah, about a year ago, I learned that I had a childhood friend who now lived in Jerusalem, Israel. And he had also been evacuated from Nazi Germany on one of the kinder transports, and he had gone to England and had been raised by a family whose last name was Foner, S-O-N-E-R. And somehow or other, we must have gone to school together in Berlin, because now, 75 years later, he still has a collection of postcards, one of which was sent by me to him in England when he was in England in the early 1940s, 41, 42. And a Japanese journalist, who's now stationed in Berlin, Germany, was writing about a book about him and discovered this postcard that I had sent him in 1940, probably. And the postcard is a picture of the ship I came to America on. And he had saved it along with other postcards all these years. And now I'm in touch with him again through this Japanese journalist who kept seeing references to my name and kept wondering who this guy with my name was. And he tracked me down to Arizona, where I lived for about 30 years. And I was on the board of the Phoenix Holocaust Association. And through that connection, we've all become connected.
Isn't that when you use paper? Over here?
So I was just wondering, so that you didn't really know this going around you. I was wondering what your like perception of the events that were happening right now, because like you shared that is kind of shocking, I guess. But also like when did you realize work at that sense of brain working? So
And it's kind of in the sex. You didn't really understand what he was. But when Jesus went in your eyes, got time.
Oh, certainly, as my father had to register for the draft in the period 1942-43, we began to get news out of Germany about some of the things that were the concentration camps, for instance. News about the gas chambers began to trickle out. So I think by the time I was 9 or 10, I began to understand and realize how lucky I had been.
As big first the weeks and that they yes.
All right, well, I want to thank, first everybody here in the audience for listening today. Mr. Salinger presented a really powerful story. I know the juniors, you guys are in the middle of studying this, but I would also offer to everybody in the room the message that he gave to us about fighting back against hate. In all its forms, we all have to push back against that. The littlest things, if they're allowed, can always become big things. Just remember, if you permit it, promote it. So it's all of our responsibility to stand up, do great, that calls up. So how about a round of applause?
Remember, be upstanders, not bystanders.
Stay with you.
And I'd like to thank all the students for being so attentive and for your great questions as well. I know he really appreciates it. So thank you so very much, and thank you again for the invitation.